You are watching the press preview now, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the acting deputy political editor of the Mail on Sunday, Claire Ellicott. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let us see what is on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Telegraph leads with the International Criminal Court issuing an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin in connection with alleged war crimes in Ukraine. The Mail claims that a planned 5-week strike by passport office staff could delay 1 million applications. It's the same story for The Times. Holidays hit as passport staff walk out over pay. And The Star invokes Cliff Richard, declaring we're not going on a summer holiday. Meanwhile, The Guardian has learned that NHS doctors are being offered as much as £5,000 in cash to recruit colleagues into private hospitals. At the end of what it calls a week of madness, the Financial Times reports that $460 billion has been wiped off the value of bank stocks worldwide. That's around £377 billion. The Express has word of a planned revolt amongst pensioners if an increase to the BBC licence fee goes ahead. And The Mirror is happy that people who hunt animals abroad will now be banned from importing them back into the UK as trophies. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Susie Boniface and Claire Ellicott. Excuse me, losing my voice there. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Telegraph and their front page, war crime arrest warrant for Putin. President Putin accused of abducting Ukrainian children by the International Criminal Court. Susie.
Yeah, if anybody out there is a student of the Second World War, you might remember something called the Lebensborn experiment, which was when Nazis and the SS in particular stole children that looked a bit blonde and blue-eyed and gave them to SS families to raise. They had pregnant, single, unmarried mothers and put them in homes and stole their children once they were born. And it was a way of Aryanizing the people who in the countries that they had occupied. These were Polish children, Danish children, Norwegian children, who were raised in the wrong place by the wrong people and who lost their culture as a result. And there's still lots of impacts of the Lebensborn experiment across Europe today. And we've known for some time that something very similar is happening in Ukraine. Now, under cover of saying that he is evacuating Russian children to safety, Vladimir Putin has signed into effect laws which basically make it possible to forcibly adopt Russian parents to forcibly adopt Ukrainian children who are tricked or just flat stolen, bussed out of occupied areas in eastern Ukraine and sent to places in Russia, often many, many, many thousands of miles away from their original home and with their parents not knowing where they are and without having given permission. So this is one of those things where we have known this was happening. It is a clear sign of a genocide when it does happen, because it shows you're trying to destroy an entire culture, a nation. And it's about time, frankly. It's well after time. Zelensky has been asking for the ICC to be taking action on this for about the past year. But it needed to be done. And what it means more than anything else, Putin may never come to court over it, but it means that he's now banned from 100 countries worldwide. And if he sets foot in them, then he could be arrested. And what it really means is that in the long term, there is no way out of this for him. There is no way back to sit at the United Nations table, to go in with the G20. He is going to be a pariah. And Russia is going to be a pariah state as long as he is at the head of that table. And that's what it means more than anything else. It's the international community saying, there's no way back for you. You've gone too far.
Claire, this is highly significant, isn't it? Because he's only the third serving president to be issued an ICC arrest warrant. That's after Sudan's Omar al-Bashir and Muammar Gaddafi, Libya's late dictator. So, I mean, this is not something that the International Criminal Court does willy-nilly or frequently by any means.
Yes, it's a huge moral victory for President Zelensky of Ukraine, and it's a really, really positive move to clamp down on some of the things that Russia's doing. But as Susie points out, it's also sadly largely symbolic because there's not really going to be a way that you're going to be able to get Putin in front of that court. And what it does mean is that he won't be able to visit any members who have signed up to the ICC, which means he can't go anywhere in Europe, and it's only really places like China and Iran that he can visit. And it also means that, he's going to be a pariah from now on. We already know we've had terrible stories about Ukrainian children being told they're going on school trips and, planned holidays and then not returning to their parents. And Russia have been quite open about this. So this is what's interesting about this, that the ICC have honed in on this issue because the Russians have been quite open about this procedure. They've been saying that it's a humanitarian rescue, and they've admitted that they've taken these children away. So it's quite easy to pin on them in some respects. And this is the first time that a Russian has been issued a permit of arrest by the ICC since the Ukrainian war began. So it's a huge move, and I'm sure it will be very positively received in Ukraine.
Susie, what do you think it means for any potential negotiations? Because Xi Jinping, the China's president, is set to visit Moscow on Monday to talk about a ceasefire.
Well, I suspect even without the ICC intervention here, President Zelensky, when he meets Xi Jinping after the trip to Moscow, would have made the return of, it's about 16,000 children, they think. They've got definite evidence of 164 having been taken, but they think it's probably more likely about 16,000. I'm sure Zelensky would have made that a condition of any negotiation in any circumstances. And the way the war has been going, Zelensky is pretty, confident, I think, of being able to push Russia even back to the original boundaries before they annexed Crimea. So that would mean that, the territories these children were taken from, which Putin disputes, would be indisputably Ukrainian if he was able to do that. And when President Xi makes those visits, it's going to be something that now he cannot ignore. It's not something that he can't discuss this with Putin when they sit down together. And it may well be the timing of this has been quite relevant, that it's been done at a certain time for a reason. The West is very worried that President Xi may in some way arm Russia as things carry on and progress and get worse. And they want to make it quite clear to President Xi that actually there's a lot of stuff on his plate and that he has some responsibility for. If he doesn't ask Putin about these children, if he doesn't raise this issue, if he doesn't answer Zelensky's questions about it, then, Xi's position is not going to be that of a peace broker, and his position would therefore be weakened. So they're kind of, in a way, I suppose it's manoeuvring China into having to be a position of being a bit more reasonable and a bit more sort of centre ground about things than they have been so far.
Claire, but do you think that the warrant will make Putin less likely to come to the negotiating table? Do you think that this has now changed the balance? Because it's not giving him a way to climb down, is it?
Well, it's this move has clearly made the Russia furious, Moscow furious about this, and they're clearly angry. So it has clearly had some impact, but I doubt whether it will actually change anything materially. I think Russia are in a bit of a predicament at the moment. You're at a kind of crucial point. We're a year into the invasion, and you are seeing sides being taken. You're seeing the West increasingly arming Ukraine, and this visit from the president, from Xi Jinping of China, is worrying, because the one thing that could really swing the balance of the war in Russia's favour is China. And as we know, China are trying to occupy, they're trying to enable negotiations under the guise of, a peace broker, trying to negotiate some sort of ceasefire. The West have made clear that they won't accept any sort of deal that means that Kyiv have to accept some of the, the bits that have already been invaded of Ukraine, that they have to cede those in any agreement. So there is a real problem there, but I think Xi Jinping is due to speak to Zelensky after speaking to Putin. So we'll see what happens with that. But there's no doubt that it won't be a deal that Ukraine is in its favour.
We shall see that. That'll be an interesting meeting to keep across. Let's move to the Mail. Susie, domestic issues, the looming passport strike.
Yeah, so the Mail's reporting that summer holidays are going to be at risk because the PCS union, which has about 1,000 members in the 4,000 or so people who work in the passport office, are going to be going out on strike in a dispute over pay and conditions for 5 weeks. Now, I'm not quite sure how the Mail's done its maths here, because they calculate that in the space of those 5 weeks, those people would normally be expected to process 1 million passport applications, which is where they're getting the claim that your summer holidays are at risk from. But of course, 3 and 4 of the PCS staff are still three and four of the passport staff are still going to be there, so there is still going to be some of them processed. And if we did 1 million passports every 5 weeks, that would mean we were doing 10 million passports a year. And that would mean the entire population of Britain was getting its passport renewed every 6 years, which doesn't 7 years doesn't quite add up to me. I don't know where the maths are. We haven't seen the inside page yet if there's any explanation about that or justification for that figure. But it does definitely mean that there's going to be some delays. But of course, our lovely post-Brexit blue passports are printed in Poland by a company which is mostly owned by the French. So they're pretty efficient compared to as if it was happening in the UK.
The Times are also pointing to that million figure, saying that 1 million people could be affected. Claire?
Yes, and I think it's a particularly busy time for processing passports, which is perhaps why it's a higher number than it is for other months. It's a crucial period where people look at their passports, they're planning their summer holidays, and they work out that they need to renew. And I think there's a suggestion at the moment that it could be about 10 weeks to renew your passport, and that could be longer than that. But either way, there's going to be major delays. And I think any family sort of planning a holiday now after the years of the pandemic and strikes and everything else, I think there are strikes in Heathrow Terminal 5 as well that are being planned for the Easter holidays. It's hard not to feel under siege if you're a family, and the cost of everything's going up, the cost of the air travel's going up. I think it's a really difficult time, and I think families probably do feel like it is a bit of a war on summer holidays, and they're probably not going to have much patience with that.
Yeah, security guards could take part in a 10-day strike in another dispute over pay. But the Times is quoting a travel and personal finance expert saying that, unfortunately, it's highly unlikely that your travel insurance will provide cover if you don't have a valid passport when you're due to travel. So that's another woe for all those people hoping to go away for their summer holiday. They won't even have any comeback, Susie.
Well, no, but I mean, if you didn't have your passport organised in time, that would apply to anybody, I think. I mean, the fact is that we're in a situation where there's perpetual strikes going on in lots of different walks of life. And if you're not on strike in your own industry, then the industries you're relying on for something are going to be on strike, or you're going to have other problems to deal with it. And I think most people appreciate that there is a huge cost of living crisis and that people need paying more for that. And I think they also appreciate that there's been, more than 10 years, 13 years of constant cutbacks, which have just meant that the Passport Office and the Border Agency in particular have lost a lot of staff and had a lot of changes to their working conditions over the past few years, which they've been asked to do more and more and more, and are getting paid effectively less and less for it. And so they've got every right to go out on strike. And if that disrupts people, that is sort of the point of a strike, isn't it? You're not supposed to be able to go out and strike and it doesn't affect anybody. That wouldn't be a strike. And the answer to this is to do what the government has finally, as far as some of the NHS staff are concerned, got round to realising, which is you get around the table and negotiate and you find a middle ground everyone can live with. The way that the government has handled all the industrial action in the public sector up till now, which is just to ignore it and say it'll go away if we just, that no one will like this, it'll just piss everybody off, no one's going to be on the side of the strikers. That hasn't worked out, especially as far as the NHS is concerned. It's not working out as far as the teachers are concerned. Okay. And the best thing to do really was to settle a bit earlier and negotiate a bit earlier, because all that happened with the strikes is you get more and more delays and waiting lists have grown.
Susie and Claire, thank you for the moment. We'll apologise for your colourful language there, Susie. I'm sure you won't do it again. Coming up, no longer a matter of pride. We'll tell you about a new development in the laws around trophy hunting when we come back. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me still, Susie Boniface and Claire Ellicott. Let us have a look at the Mirror and this front page story. The Mirror claiming victory in a campaign that they've been running, and this is MPs likely to vote on a ban the importation of animal body parts that people that pay to go hunting and they bring them back as trophies. Claire, take us into this story.
Well, who can forget the case of Cecil the lion, who was shot a few years ago? I think a businessman paid £35,000 to shoot him in Zimbabwe. It was a case that caused loads of horror. People were furious about it, and eventually, very many years later, there's this trophy hunting ban. So this is a ban on importing the trophies, the heads, the horns, the tails of animals who have been killed in places like big safari parks in Africa, and bringing them back to the UK. And what's interesting about this is it wasn't a government bill, even though the government have said that they would ban it in the past. It's a private member's bill brought forward by a backbench MP. It's a seismic move, and it's got through the House of Commons despite a number of MPs objecting to it, and it has now reached the House of Lords, and it should become law. And it's a huge victory for animal rights, animal people who are pro-animal rights, and the vast majority of the public, I think, are probably on side with this. There are some people who argue that trophy hunting is good for conservation because people pay large amounts of money and that enables more work to be done to preserve the habitats of these animals. But the vast majority of the public are really in favour of something like this. And I think it was a huge day when this went through in the Commons today, and a lot of ministers were very tearful as it went through on both sides of the House. So a big day for animal rights, I think.
Susie, what do you think of the argument that it is good for conservation and actually it's a lot of income that these various countries are going to lose out on, which would actually help them keep many of the species alive and thriving?
It doesn't really add up when you're actually on the ground in these places, as I've been reporting on various poaching and other issues that they have in some of these game reserves. Some big game hunters have funded anti-poaching patrols, for example. But, you know, if you had a thriving tourism industry without big game hunting, then that lion, which perhaps its death might raise £50,000, you know, how much of that is going to the local community? How much of it's actually going to a white businessman who's selling the trip in the first place? How much of it is being used to export stuff out of the country? How much was actually going to the guys at the bottom of the pile? And if you didn't have that, if that businessman wasn't spending 50 grand to shoot a lion, then how much more money could you make out of attracting multiple tourists to come and see that same lion, you know, in situ, or to support them there in the environment? It doesn't really add up, the conservation argument sometimes. There are ways of doing it, and there are ways of making sure the population is healthy for wild animals. What you should be doing with, you know, any kind of hunting is ensuring that the ones that you hunt are the older lions who have, for example, and the older wild animals who had done their breeding, who have raised their families and who are now getting sick and are getting a bit older. But unfortunately, those are not the ones that people are interested in killing. It's just flat. And it says here in this Mirror story, and it's a campaign that the paper's run for many years. And it's, you know, we win our campaigns alarmingly often, really, because we shouldn't have to campaign on this stuff. It should be clear and obvious, you'd have thought. Susie, but it says, you know, he doesn't understand how people could be this psychopathic and just want to go and kill.
We must leave it there, Susie, I'm afraid, but you'll have a chance to say much, much more in the next hour. Susie and Claire, for the moment.